So I guess something that I gave in the article is that similar to what crypto and just what I've experienced is that it's a unique path for each DAO, each group of people is that recipe piece is that you have to take the bits that you have for each system, each thing you're working on and use that as the towards the I was rambling.
Are you involved in other DAOs? What's your exposure?
You guys, this is it. And then I did hear about the Stoner Cats DAO, but I'm not a holder, so I know of its existence.
Got you. Okay. And I suppose this is a good time to ask anybody else. Are you involved in any other DAOs, and do you have any insights on their reward slash incentive models?
I lied. I didn't mean to, but I lied. I have been a member of Bankless DAO too.
Oh, cool. I think a lot of people are exposed to bankless. So yeah, so to carry on that, yes, as Nick said, there's like a path to earning, so to speak, versus doing it for the sake of the tech. It's still, I think, a bit of both. People seem to come for the money and stay for the tech, or come for the money and stay for the community. That seems to be a thing as well. But now people are being rewarded. Actually, I wanted to bring that up as we go a bit along. I don't know what you guys think about the word reward or incentive. Incentive, I suppose, makes sense, but what do you think of the word reward in terms of payment for contribution? Is that, it seems, I don't know, it feels like an uncomfortable word to me. Maybe I'm overthinking this.
In which way uncomfortable? There are so many ways in which it can be uncomfortable.
Reward feels like what you give your dog for sitting, if your dog sits down, here's your reward. Or if you're a well-behaved child, here's your reward. I don't know, it's that.
I agree, actually. I think it's a kind of hangover from the bounty hunter days. There's, like, certainly in 2017, airdrops were like the main marketing tool. And it was like, oh, I've got to do X, Y, Z, and I get my reward. And it is close to the give your dog a bone level of incentive. Jump through these hoops and you'll get the reward. So I understand, I get, we don't really use it, but payment doesn't quite work either, in a sense. It's like one of the things that you have to unlearn, which I think Rafa gets into on the recipes, not instructions section, is we're in a kind of, it says ambiguity, volatility, constant change, and the opportunity for artistic experimentation. This is not, we use a mix of them for specific roles, but DAOs are not really the kind of place that you're going to get a standard payroll setup. If you're not going to get the, I'm turning up to, get my monthly salary and it's guaranteed to be the same amount every time, especially if you're receiving network tokens. It's much closer to gaining like a equity share in a startup, where many people work in startups and are incentivized by co-ownership as opposed to just getting a salary.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I was trying to explain it to someone the other day, and I somehow fell onto this air miles thing, where you, instead of buying a ticket and getting air miles, you do the thing, whatever the thing is that you're doing, and in return you receive tokens which are fungible, versus sort of air miles which are non-fungible generally. They're just whatever the system will give you. But within this, there's this recognized, accepted medium that you are paid in, and then it's up to you what you decide to do with that medium afterwards. So it's just, that's a really big thing. I think, I'm not sure where you want to come onto that, Nick, but in terms of the difference between, maybe it's the next part where we start going into more detail, between how we're thinking about it here at finance.vote and how I suppose a lot of other DAOs are approaching it, because I think a lot of DAOs seem to be trying to rebuild the same model of TradOrg, but in a decentralized way.
I think that's fair to say. I think there's people have a conventional paradigm of the world of work, and it's different in many significant ways. And I think that notion that Rafa talks about it like being like a comfort blanket, like people like certainty, and DAOs are more of an uncertain domain than, like, again, it's much closer to being part of a startup enterprise, which may or may not work, but the upside is far higher. You do not get any share of the upside of the enterprise if you're on a salaried wage at a traditional institution, right? A traditional org. You get paid there's an implicit asymmetry between you and the powers that be. Powers that be say we want X amount of workers to do this amount of work, and we'll pay this much for it, and you are the resource for reaching the goal. So you are a cost to the organization that reaches its goals, and if it reaches its goals, you don't necessarily get a slice of the success that you may do if you like there's some kind of clear path to ascending the ranks in the organization, that the organization's made a load of revenue and now it can spend more money and now there's more opportunities, but it's indirect. In crypto, there's a much more direct exposure to the success of the enterprise, which is, it's a higher risk reward environment than you would get in a traditional org. So there's a new paradigm here of how do you distribute share of a network to people who help build it. This touches on the kind of Web3 tribes thing, right? You're being part of a tribe that if the tribe wins, everyone wins. And ideally proportional to the contribution you've made to the network, which can either be financial or, in the case of DAOs, participation and contribution. So this is why we're using, I think reward is used here because of that, as opposed to payment, salary. That's old world language.
I think, yeah, there's another word as well they use, we'll see it in a second, which is it's like package, I think was the word. It just gives this sense of, I think it's part of this, how do you entice people from old world into Web3? And maybe you have to use some of these words that people just have a tacit meaning with, have a connection that makes sense. I think if we came up with a new way of talking about these things now, maybe it would make it even harder to pull people across to Web3 because they just don't have a frame of reference.
Yeah, I think there's an element of playing into what people conventionally know and understand. But I think that these points are interesting, that what people get paid in, I agree with both of these things. It should be liquid. That is, people can exit it if they want. So there has to be, if you've got a liquid market, you're paying people the token, you've got to expect people to spend it. And then the ownership dynamic is that the token itself is not merely a currency, it has some additional value or additional power within the community. It has an ownership dynamic to it, which I completely agree with.
So in our instance, then, that would be, obviously, in some governance, there'd be involvement, but not all governance, because some of it's gated by entities, but you would have the ability to use your token in things like yield and
Yep, you need the token to get into the governance, so you can like level up your governance with the token. And if the token is designed to capture value from the network, then the ownership can come from essentially mutual value exposure to like, so if we become a network that helps hundreds of DAOs launch, and the token captures some of the value from those DAO launches, then anyone holding it gains the upside from it. And that's the kind of ownership dynamic. But, so yeah, perhaps disambiguate ownership, and it's an interesting point. Is ownership governance power? There is this notion of perceived ownership, like I created this, like I am responsible for some of this success, which is a psychological idea of ownership.
Yeah, which is legitimate. Like, I think a lot of people have those connections with all types of brands they've got nothing to do with, but you still have a sense of, oh, I was somehow a part of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And this like reward decision flow, I like, and does a good job here of specifying, creating recipes, which I like this notion of recipes as opposed to policies. There just needs to be a lot more wiggle room in DAOs because there's greater levels of uncertainty.
I thought this was interesting because it was like, it touched on essentially the airdrop debate we've been having. It seems to be like, what's the word? It's a really delineated version of that. Like, these are the things that we were talking about.
Yes, very much. So it's on the same page. What's the North Star? As in, what's the point of this? So thinking from a mechanism design point of view, we'll say, okay, we want a pot of rewards or a pot of token distribution for people who synchronize with us and turn up to our meetings. What we're doing there is setting the North Star for, we want you to be present and synchronous. We want you to be a supporter. We want you to vote. So I think that's what this principal North Star angle is going at here, which I agree with. The eligibility is very much what we debated. Who should be in this pot? What should the reward be and under what terms? Again, that's part of that debate, is what's the weighting of that distribution? What's the amount? So the structure, for example, is how, let's say our markets voters, the amount we're debating through the voting weighting, and then the structure is determined by the algorithm for splitting it down for subsequent votes. And then our consensus is implicit in that vote as well. We're defining the way that we agree this, and it's using our influence.
Yeah, exactly. I thought these are, I feel like things we've just been implicitly talking about with things like design principles. And I remember you saying to me, I do not feel comfortable being in the position where I'm going to make this huge decision on everyone's behalf. Let's get it out to the community. And that's kind of, so there's this, it feels like it's almost a bit of a double-edged sword for a lot of DAOs, potentially, I'm not sure. But there's around, compensation package is the word I'm searching for. So around what people are calling compensation or reward or whatever, there seems to be this, that seems to get very centralized very quickly. And maybe that's necessary, I think, in the beginning. I wonder how you move away from that longer term, I think would be the challenge.
Yeah, which I think is what we're doing, right? I got stuck on this initial distribution of our airdrop for a long time because of that. Like, I don't want to be the person that decides what everyone gets. It just felt too asymmetric in power. But now I think with our bank vote, we've landed something that allows the community to decide. We've created a framework, created a structure, and then the amounts are determined by.
Yeah, I definitely think this is literally where you were, right? It's simple or fair. It's like, how do you make that decision? This was interesting.
Like the kind of hot button meme there of that there is a tension between simple and fair. There's like, even the notion of fair is very challenging in this. There's always going to be someone who thinks it's unfair. Like for us, the markets vote has felt like they should get a huge chunk of it. What's fair to them is different to someone who's working full time and building in a different way. So what you have to do is build nuance into the process, and that necessarily introduces complexity. So this kind of hot button meme is actually like spot on for almost everything. We're trying to build fairer structures, but consequently, people find it more difficult to understand. Fairer means more rewards, more design is required.
By the way, if anyone has anything they want to say or questions or just want to make a comment on it, just pipe in. But my hot take on this is that, and I've thought this for quite a long time, I don't think there is such thing as a fair system in any part of life or technology or whatever. I think it's like this, it's an ideal that people hold, but I think the reality is that I think it's almost impossible to build a fair system just due to the nature of reality, where people are in such different situations, timing of life, economic environments, political environments, whatever, even down to the speed of their PC. Fair is not, it's like an ideal and that doesn't really exist.
But it's almost like it's not a state. It's people's beliefs, right?
It's an ideal. You strive.
I think it's contextual, I would say.
Yeah, that's the right word. I think it's just difficult. It's like we end up, what is fair? Fair is relative, right? It's what's fair to me might be different. Fair, your conception of fair and my conception of fair might be different. So how is there a global notion of fair? And in fact, trying to design a global notion of fair can get you into very hot water, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't possibly rationalize everyone's, this group have had a harder time than this group. So how do you then need to say how much harder time have they had it? And how do you possibly reweight whatever incentive structures exist to say, all right, now we're square, right? Now it's fair. Now we've settled that debt, if you like, of the social debt that exists is now settled because we've designed these new systems for it.
Without being hyperbolic about it, it's next stop digital communism, or it start heading in that direction where you're trying to find levelers for everything.
Not necessarily. Communism is this notion of everyone gets the same, right? It's like there is like there's very much people who think the DAO movement is like a pseudo neo-communist movement because of this, because it's like there is this idea that we can create this, everyone's on the same level, everyone's equal, everyone's like the means of production of the users, etc., etc. But this is what happens, like the communist systems fail because there is no such thing as designing a fair system is almost impossible. So always
if I may,
yeah.
There's a Canadian psychologist, Jordan Peterson, and when he brings up the subject of fairness, he separates it into there's equality of opportunity and equality of results, and that the equality of results is that leads down to this path of communism, or in the end it's not really fair because it's not taking into account what the person needs. But I think when we talk about striving for fairness, the best we can do is to focus all we can in terms of equality of opportunity, so that it's a system that rewards competence. Everyone that has the skills can go for those opportunities, and it ends up rewarding the competence instead of any other attribute.
But that's also a dangerous way of putting it, because if you reward competencies, people who just don't have competencies for some other reason of their lives, they end up excluded from this, right? Because
so you build a system to help those people skill up, but if
some people can't skill up, and they're still people. You know what I mean? There are people who cannot skill up at all, so they're gonna end up free riders. Imagine someone who's like 100 years old. Maybe they cannot no longer skill up in the sense that it is useful now. You can't train them to be programmers or whatever because they're just old. So what do you do with these people? So the system becomes really, if you just start always base everything on I know it's about contributions, but the weird thing that the fairness that is based only on contribution is a really scary one. Because some people just should not contribute. Oh, well, I don't know, babies or super old people or people with some kind of disabilities.
It's a great question, and I think it's
like healthy communities will tolerate free riders. If they don't tolerate free riders, it's really scary. But I'm rambling now.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, but I don't think it should stop from an objective of creating an environment of equal opportunities. I think that there's a second layer that needs to be thought of, and what is the best thing that can be done for those that just can't skill up, or that are already in a place.
Or they don't want to skill up; they just want to stay free riders. That's also fine.
I think you're on push to talk, NFTA.
Every time. When I join, it tells me I have to be on push to talk.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I think, Raghu, you hit a really good point on, you said equal opportunity, but if we're building something new, I think I've been seeing the shift towards equitable opportunity. So that is meeting those people that maybe can't contribute because they're 100 years old and can't learn programming, but they can be greeters at the door. They can be everyone. That equitable opportunity is.
And I think this is it's finding a path for as many people as possible, right? You can't be equitable on day one because there isn't the resource bandwidth to be able to accommodate everyone, but having processes to increasingly accommodate as many diverse people as possible is the goal. And yeah, you just need to, you can easily fall into these sort of traps. I've ended up having conversations about like societal design here, and there is parallels, but there is necessarily a bound around what we're doing. We have a domain, right? So we're building deep tech, and there is a technological base to this, and there is going to be a bias towards, it's my daughter coughing. There's going to be a bias towards people who are willing and able to learn more about blockchain technology and DAOs. Yeah, we're in an innovative field, and what we're doing, like the Sherpa role, Scott, is a great example of like, here's a path for less technical people to be able to contribute to the DAO, and that's a really valuable contribution. And what we're doing over time is adding more paths to contribution over time. And the other sort of broader notion of fairness that is important here is that crypto systems tend to bias people with the highest end of capital. So this notion of a fair launch is a really difficult one. And what we've seen is unfair launches with some of the L1s where 90% of the token supply has gone to a small handful of VCs who now basically have financial dominion over the network in perpetuity, right? Because they can just relentlessly sell their tokens onto late buyers forevermore. And that network is essentially fundamentally broken at that point. So giving everyone the opportunity to get exposure to the token at a fair price over a prolonged period of time is very much one of the key design goals.
I think with the what I find really fascinating with the fair launch is that is actually when you look at it like throughout society in any domain, like wherever you are, there is no such thing as, you know, a fair game. All games are rigged in one way or the other towards one side or the other side. And that's why I think people really struggle with what we're talking about in a fair launch, because people want to be on one side of the rug or the other side of the rug. And you don't always want to get rugged, but when people FOMO into things, that's I'm okay to be on the side of the rug that's going to get pulled. Or people want the idea of being able to progress to a point where they're on the other side of the rug where they're going to pull it.
There's always asymmetry, right? So it's just that, is it so asymmetric that no one can win apart from the people that got the asymmetric gain to begin with? And if it's at the point where, so necessarily networks need capital to bootstrap themselves. So investors and VCs are always going to have the asymmetry capital. And if they didn't exist, the network wouldn't exist. So there would be no conversation about fairness in the first. It's like, so there needs to be an asymmetry to people who have the capital to be able to start this up. But is there processes for leveling that playing field? So for us, that includes distributing reserve assets to people who contribute, and it involves vesting, ensuring that the people with capital can't control the market to a too great a degree. And there's L1s out there, which they call them VC chains for a reason. They're controlled by VCs and will never be democratic spaces because of it. So this is why I don't raise too much then. There's people raising hundreds of millions of dollars on pre-launch because there's a lot of VC money floating around, but that ultimately balks the network because anyone who comes at a later. So there's a lot of like parallel notions of fairness here. And yeah, I think the kind of fairness construct in our case is about, and certainly within the scope of this discussion, is how do we, I think fairness arrives through consensus. What's the distribution we're all as happy as possible with, which is the purpose of our voting tools.
And do you think, so just looking at this sheet here, this kind of work eligibility is like a checklist for things that are eligible or make someone eligible at least for, however you want to look at that distribution through the airdrop. Is that in your mind like a direction that you think you'd like to go in later on in terms of slightly more granularity, sorry? So you've got your distribution.
Yeah, this is a million miles away from our bank distribution, right? You could roughly talk these as buckets of work. We differ on this, like governance participation is incentivized. Massive things that are like crossed off actually here, we will incentivize.
Yeah.
I think you can incentivize almost everything. And yeah, so these are like contested things, right? So there's like member eligibility. One of the things we haven't gone down as much, if you go down a little bit, Matt, is this notion of essentially promoting, I have thought about doing this, but like
long-term holders versus short-term holders.
No, this notion of time commitment. So saying in order to gain access to this, you need to have put X amount of time in a week or month or whatever, right?
Yeah.
You need, which feels a bit. It's one of the things that's like, when you get into this sort of time served game, you can end up with, there's people who can turn up, Like there's people with like UV, for example. He can do more in an afternoon than some developers could do in a year. So there's this heavily asymmetric like capability space that is not time bounded. But there's necessarily some things that are present, like just turn up and help out, be around. But it's one of the things that I've not wanted us to get in too much. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a bit like, because you feel like edging towards that. I can't remember what software it is that companies install on people's computers to see if people are doing the work. And kind of like monitor.
Yeah, I've seen I know people working in startups that are doing this. Like, I'm watching how many keystrokes you're doing on your key. I remember being at an education conference years ago, which was like run by these people who were watching your attention on your webcam. And they'd even come up with this idea of zapping people when they were like eyes weren't on the screen. Yeah, it was a funded Chinese education platform where they were watching your eyes, and if you weren't paying attention in your lectures, it was like electric shocks, but like minor, pretty crazy. But yeah, that's where this can go, right? Just ultra surveillance of everyone's time, and all that happens then is people just fake it.
And we always seem to end up there, but you're not a million miles away from eyeball scanning at that point. It's like next natural step, DNA, eyeball scans.
Yeah,
genetics.
exactly. Just more surveillance data. It's so the outcome is what we want to measure. Really,
yeah, I agree. I'm glad that we haven't got to this point yet where we're measuring the time investment, because I think one of the key things that we spoke about is it's when people join the DAO, they're there for the love of not for the love of the DAO is the wrong word, but they want to see the DAO succeed and survive, whether that's because they're invested in tokens or they just love DAOs, whatever that may be. It's about, just wanting to be a part of something which is building versus the idea of I'm going to.
And there is a reward from gaining. One of the things we're trying to is reward people for their commitment to turning up to these things by learning more. Like the most valuable thing you can do in crypto is understand it and learn about it. So the value that we can provide, I think you're getting rewarded by coming to these sessions, for example, that isn't necessarily monetary.
Yeah, completely agree. This was interesting. There's quite a few things here. I don't know if you had a chance to look through these, Nick. I did. It's quite granular, actually. It's super granular in terms of the notion of the types of assets.
Yeah, I kind of like this. These are nice little frameworks. We're getting into, and this is a lot of where the semantic governance idea starts coming in. We're applying semantics tags to things. You're extrapolating or breaking down digital assets into semantic ideas, NFTs, reputation, community tokens, stablecoins, types of allocation, grants, contributions, objective network analysis. We're doing a lot of this stuff. I find a lot of there's convergence moment happening here where there's lots of different DAOs running at the same thing. And yeah, I think I like it. I think it's an interesting thing. It's just giving people buckets to put things in, which allow you to reach consensus on them.
One thing I will say for Rafa's work is he's very detailed. Like the references at the end are crazy. The amount of work he's done to pull this all together, it's a lot. It's very impressive. Again, this is a similar thing, so we don't need to go too much into it. But I think if people want to have a read of this, they really should, because it just gives you an idea of what other DAOs are doing as well at the same time, which is really interesting. Now, this is an interesting one because I suppose we're taking a slightly different perspective on this, Nick. I don't know if you agree with that. But this part here specifically, I think, is an interesting statement. For individually calculated rewards, consider market pay rates, if any available, total effort work, and adjustment values based on volatility and upside. Here's an example of a formula. Do you think it's challenging to pull market pay rates? Because what market exactly are you pulling that from? I think since COVID's hit and more people are working remotely and they're exposed to remote work and they're able to get roles in different countries, maybe there is something there now for that. But generally, I think that's really hard to say this is the market pay rate for X, because depending on what X is, things differ. So if you're based out of the Philippines and you're basing your salaries on that for your DAO, good luck trying to find other developers. I think obviously these things will change, like you'll learn pretty quickly. But it just, again, it feels like it's this import from a traditional organization and trying to fit things into like Web3.
And market rate is just totally absurd in crypto.
Yeah.
That it's like Olympus DAO are offering 15 grand a month for community managers or whatever, which is absurd. It's only because they're basically running a Ponzi scheme and can aggregate $200 million and don't know what to spend it on. So that the market rate is absurdly skewed towards like the market rate notion. I think for me, this notion of autonomy in DAOs means you do what's sensible for your treasury, do what's sensible for your world, and build relative fairness notions. When you start to bring in the wider crypto space, so much stupid stuff happening that you could end up doing stupid stuff. I remember watching Badger DAO, like one of the first votes there was like, oh, let's pay, the team just paid themselves $1 million each. It's that kind of stuff can get stupid.
Yeah, and I suppose that's the benefit of what we're doing with the Senate. We've got this sense-making organ across the consensus, if that makes sense. So you've got like a group of people who actually want to see a long-term thing for the DAO and not watch itself implode because of a couple of stupid votes.
Yeah, there's no guarantee that a community through governance will do what's right for the network. They might just do what's right for themselves. Like, you can't presume non-zero thinking across a community at all times. So there has to be a fallback plan for, if everyone votes to blow the whole thing up, then there needs to be a kill switch on some governance decisions until you've built governance systems that you can be damn sure that's not going to happen. And that is the goal.
Yeah. I think, and when we get to that point in the EU, when we're talking more about the Parliament and the Senate and how these things work, I think it should give people a lot more insight as to what you're thinking, because there's a lot there.
And I'm hoping to get the governance framework document out next week, once I've got a bit of time to move away from the DAO a little bit. I've noticed there's some ideas in there that the space is converging on.
And again, we touched on this already, and reward consensus, how do we agree on the reward? Yeah, we as we touched on before about the bank.vote airdrop and the debates, we're doing it through conversation consensus and then voting consensus after that. And then, so there's a signaling vote, there's a debate, and then there's a sort of intentions vote. Maybe it's not on the blockchain, so it's not going to be a binding vote in that sense, but it's going to be close enough to what we follow.
It will be, yeah. And Raf's saying the same thing here, that there should be mechanisms, safeguards to protect the DAO treasury. So that's the selected team consensus stuff. So yeah, we're doing kind of step 5, I think, pretty well.
I know, like with this one, I thought this was interesting because I suppose there's always going to be bias when there's people. The DAOs are the human layer on top of the blockchain. So you're going to inherently get different types of biases. But I felt like with the vote, actually, you can remove a lot of that. People are going to vote, like you say, generally in what suits them, serves them, but it doesn't necessarily impact on, I don't like that person, so I don't think they should get any reward.
Yeah, and I thought this was funny. The kind of like, someone turns up with a bored ape. He must be important. Like a new kind of, digital bias. Rafa calls it, which is interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely a state for.
Yeah.
It's definitely taking that thing. It's strange, but I get it. So that's the end of the article. So I think he talked about a lot of really interesting things, and like I said, the appendix is insane. So if you want to learn more about this, just check out the appendix.
Yeah, and it's funny to see this org chart. It's funny, I built almost exactly a kind of structure like that inside a university about 6 years ago now. It's funny. I think that's largely where I see the mini DAOs type structures going. It's a fractal organizational structure.
Right.
I didn't know Friends with Benefits were doing that. But yeah, no, really interesting article with a lot of useful information. I thought it was really good.
Yeah, I think Rafa's work is generally really good. Like I say, he's a deep thinker, which I think we value over here for sure. Does anybody have anything they wanted to say or any comments? Or if we don't, we can talk a bit about the book club and we can do a quick straw poll on which book we want to read. Straw poll it is. Hey, Ksenia, I'm streaming and I'm doing all different types of things. It's going to be easier if you could have a look at the books that are there, and we can just quickly decide which one we're going to put up for the reading club.
Do that. Just a second. I wasn't sure. I wasn't on impression that we're doing a vote, but it doesn't have to be like super duper efficient.
I think we could just do a quick poll here, right? We'll just decide here and now.
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds good. So it's in the reads. So what do we have? No, it's in the reading club. What are we talking about? It's in the reading club. So what do we have? We have The Misbehavior of Markets by Benoit. We have
Oh, sorry, go on.
I can also say who suggested it, but I didn't want to influence your choices, right?
Oh, fair enough. That's a good point. Yeah.
Or I can just mix it all together, mix it all up, and say yes. Some random people suggested that.
Do
Anyway,
posts, can't we? And then do the emojis thing on it as a vote.
I can't do it because
So
I'm recording my screen.
No, how do we do a poll? We can just, what we could do, we could just all go into the reading club and react with an emoji on a book that you want to read, right? But then we're gonna, and then if you actually end up with a book that you don't want to read, you have to read it anyway.
Which is good. It's good to read books that are outside of your scope, right? Like it's a good habit to actually.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm gonna mention all the sentience in case you don't know where the DAO Reading Club is, and we're gonna all put emojis on under the books, and then we'll try to make sense of it. Maybe we're gonna have a schism, and there will be like two communities splitting up and reading two different books. Who knows? So there is Prometheus Rising by Robert Wilson. Then there is Maurice Merleau-Ponty, El Ojo y el Spiritu, The Eye and the Spirit by Maurice Merleau-Ponty. Yeah. Also available in PDF. That's very nice. Then there is The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, The Fight for Human Future at the New Frontier of Power. I suggested it and I only read the first third because it's just too thick. But I think it's a nice book, but I don't recommend reading all of it. Then there is also Finite and Infinite Games. I don't know if it's considered a book. I'm trying to open. Yeah, it is a book. A Vision of Life as Play and Possibility. James P. Cars. I'm given a task of mispronouncing a lot of authors' names, so I'm feeling a bit nervous.
I'm going to stop sharing now so I can do this.
Sorry, what?
Sorry, I'm going to stop sharing and I can create a poll quickly.
Also just use emojis.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that wasn't it. Because you also suggested another one, The Seat of the Soul by Gary Zhukov. Or Zhukov, I don't know how to pronounce it. Douglas Coupland, All Families Are Psychotic. And another one by Douglas Coupland, Microserves. And I think that was all. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Some people probably will be able to read all the 7. Yeah, so we have 7 entries, and unless I'm missing something. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. No, we have 8.
Nice.
I think we can just create a list and let people emote on it, can't we?
Yeah.
Leave it open a little bit.
Then we can come back on it. We can catch up on it.
So should we just...
Go on, sorry.
So what was the idea? Do we make a poll or do we just let people add emojis to the existing entries in the channel?
What, haven't you, Matt?
Yeah, I can create a quick bot with emoticons as a thing. Poll, sorry.
Okay, cool. Cool.
What I would say is this. So going forward over Christmas and New Year, I think we were discussing this with Nick, is that we're going to do the reading club as an ongoing thing. So that will still happen over the New Year break, and the community calls. So we can still catch up on books in between during the downtime.
Yeah, sounds great. So the reading club becomes a book club, and the community call stays community call, and this will be the program. I also suggested I don't want to make it like the program chat, but I suggested something to Naved and in the health channel that we have async, like meditations and async stuff during this time as well. I even suggested that we call the program theme async.
I think Naved's going to be away for 2 weeks, 3 weeks even.
Yeah, but that's why we could just have the async thing that everyone can do, and then when we all come back
I
and
got you.
we can share some. So all
Yeah.
these sessions, they could be like a super. I actually got inspired by No Fun Token Art mentioning that she's doing this little 1 minute meditation. So it doesn't have to be synchronous. I could suggest some silly ritual as well that people can do in their own time or whatever.
Hear me?
Yep, can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah, on this topic, I just want to add that Prometheus Rising, the book I suggested, has also some exercises that are very similar to meditations. So, not sealing my entry, which I am totally doing, but yeah, it's also a consciousness expansion manual, if I may say, and the exercises in this book can be good material for the async thing.
So come on, everyone, shield your books. Ksenia shield hers.
Me
Marta
next.
said hers. Yeah, you're next, NFTA. Go for it. Shit.
I chose 2 books by Douglas Copeland. He is, to make sure I'm okay. He is one of my favorite authors. He is Canadian, and he is very smart and excellent. And All Families Are Psychotic is fun, and Microserfs is a little bit more, I think, DAO mindset. So fun or business.
Nice. Nick?
Yeah, I think it's called The Misbehavior of Markets. So Benoit Mandelbrot, he's the guy who discovered the Mandelbrot set, which is a fractal thing. It's one of the most fascinating bits of math. But yeah, he's also been responsible for talking about complex systems in markets, and that book's about how fractal geometry and fractals appear in market dynamics, and how it manifests in risks, and how you can't really predict what happens in markets. But yeah, it's quite interesting. I've started reading it last couple of weeks. Anyway, but yeah, Mandelbrot's a genius. It's quite just an interesting tale from him.
That is interesting. I do trade fractals, actually. So that could be, for me, very interesting.
Yeah, like fractals, people connecting fractals to markets. They appear in markets. There's no two ways about it. It's a slightly, I guess it's a not too technical book, but yeah, if you don't understand fractals anyway, they're well worth looking into. It's really interesting.
I
One
have
of my
an
favorite
embarrassing
things.
story about Mandelbrot.
Robert
Actually,
Anton.
thinking it's a type. It's a type of a I can tell an embarrassing story later. It didn't include fractals and cookies made into fractals and kind of taste like almonds, but yeah.
Nice. That's a good one. So should we call you the Cookie Monster from now on?
Fractal cookie monster.
I have another idea of something that we can participate as an async club. Fractal Friday is something that happens in the world and crypto. And
What is Fractal Friday?
Friday. How does that work?
you just put colorful fractals out into the world, and that's pretty much it.
Just post some fractals. Yeah, I'm into that.
I like it. I'm obsessed with pi. So I'm always like, it's not fractal, it's spiral. But yeah, I love everything pi.
Oh, I'm into the Pi Shibaku. You want it?
Is that what you got?
Yeah, the beginning of it, unfortunately.
Well, no one's doxed themselves on what Shibu, apart from NFTA. I know what you got, but everybody else has been eerily quiet.
I bought Shibaku 69 off the secondary market. I couldn't help myself.
I don't know who got Shibaku 420, but I'm super jealous.
I thought you.
No, I requested it on Twitter as a joke, but I definitely didn't get it.
I thought you got it. I thought you said that you got it. That's why I thought I knew what you had.
I have 8 of them, but none of them is particularly interesting in arithmetics or golden or something like that.
Not
Mine
yet.
are all interesting. They're
I think I've got all these books here now, so I'm going to put this out in a second into the world. But I think what's really interesting with the Shibaku thing is that everyone's making all the assumptions around what's like important and what's not important, but nobody actually has any idea. So if you look at like the exchange chat or the sale chat, it's like rare Shibaku, it's got 2 alien discs and a spanner, and it's just super rare. You have no idea, dude, if that's rare or not. And people are like, oh, I'm going to sell mine because mine's not rare and it's not strong, and you have no idea if it's not rare or not strong yet.
The need to attribute meaning is bigger than having the correct idea.
Tell me about it. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
really
but that's
good
the
point.
most. That's the best. That's the best part. It's these discussions, I think, about mine is super special and this one isn't, and I really love this weird consensus that emerges. That is that some things are maybe rare and some are not, and people still agree that they're cool.
True. This is a consensus, right, in its own way. Actually, Maria, are you here?
You know, there's this most expensive baseball card, right? Why the fuck is it even more expensive? I was trying to the most expensive baseball card. I forgot what player is on it. Whatever, it's not my thing. But I couldn't figure out. There's this kind of consensus that is just, I don't know if it's the rarest one or whatever. It's just collectors decided so by some weird consensus.
I think it's Babe Ruth, right? It's a Babe Ruth card. It's like this weird sort of most expensive card ever. Like, it's crazy. I don't know if Maria is here or not, because I don't think she's had a chance to shill her book. I'm not sure.
I'm here. Can you see me?
You are? Hi. Did you want to tell us about your book?
Yes, but it's a book from a French philosopher who thinks about how the body affects what we perceive. In this book, he speaks about the eye and how a painting, on how we are determined of what we see, something like that. I put the PDF because it's hard for me to explain, but it's very interesting for our perspective of NFT and so. I think it's very it's a good read. I recommend it very much.
Nice. So if I understood you correctly, are you saying it's to do with how we perceive things, like through the visual cortex, like through the eye itself?
Yes. But how biology also determines the things, and it's like very meta, but it has all of that. Not so long, so it's not a hard work.
Ooh, okay, cool. Nice one. Thank you. I'm compiling the list and I'll publish it in 2 secs. So my book, just quickly before I forget, actually, is called Seat of the Soul, and it's about, a lot of it's about neuropsychology and about how the brain works, and I think a few of us have touched on a similar type of thing, but it's about understanding your own actions and motivations, how these things developed over time, where they sit within you, and gives you like I haven't read it fully myself, I've only read a little bit at the beginning, but I thought it was really interesting. And there's a study guide as well, so there are things that we can do as a community together as well throughout it. But it's all about sort of personal insights and becoming one, better integration.
Yeah, we actually did choose similar topics. Also, Maria's book is really similar to the perception of the self and consciousness. I read the first 3 pages. It's only 27 pages, but it is dense. So yeah, I think we do touch similar subjects. That's a good thing.
I think it's like what Nick was talking about before with convergence. A lot of people tend to come towards one thing at a relatively similar time, sometimes really early, but throughout history that's always been it. But
yeah, hope it scales in a fractal way outwards as well.
I do like Fractal Friday. That could definitely just be a thing, though. I think that's just gonna. I think we're just gonna. That's a thing.
I've been studying fractals I've been studying fractals for the past 3 years, and I've been taking a course. There is an online course in Santa Fe University that's called Complexity. So it's called Complexity Explorer, and it's an online course material for fractals and chaos mathematics. It's very interesting, actually. Also sparked from the fact that in the human body we have a lot of fractals, and the human lung is also built in a fractal mathematical manner.
Not know that.
Anyway. Yeah. The fact that the body is built by having a code that scales out in a fractal way instead of having a design on how the lung should be. It just says, okay, go 2 centimeters, split in half, then go 1 centimeter, split in half, go 0.25, split in half. And this code scales down to the whole structure of the lung. The blood vessels are the same, and also the heart rhythm has a fractal dimension that seems to make a lot more sense than the heart rates. For example, you may have 65 beats per minute, but it's not the same because it doesn't have the same fractal dimension as another person who has 65 beats per minute. And you can diagnose early disease from it. And we were using it to diagnose early diabetes and sometimes if a COVID patient gets a bit worse. So yeah, we have fractal rhythms in the human heart, maybe in the brain, so why not in the markets?
Exactly. Why not? Very interesting. You have to send a link to that in the DAO reading chat, to that course and thing you're talking about.
Fractals in the human body. Yeah, I'll drop. I have 1,000 links. I'm afraid I'll spam again the channels. We should make.
Just pace yourself one a day, every day for the next 10 years. You'll be fine.
Yeah. Okay, I think maybe that means 2 per day for the 10 years.
Cool. Thanks everyone for joining today. I don't know if anybody else has got anything they want to chip in or say or talk about, but we can wrap it up if we want here.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Enjoyed that. I'm gonna have to jump off now, but see you later, everyone. We'll be online tomorrow.